Have you ever had a situation where your students, they completely blank out? You know it's because they don't have the vocabulary background. So what do we do? Hello historians, and welcome back to my channel. In today's highly requested video, I'm going to be sharing some lessons and activities that you can use to teach history vocabulary in your classroom. Now, if this is already sounding way more interesting than your last in-service, be sure to show this channel some love by giving me a thumbs up and subscribing. And if we haven't met before, hi, I'm Cecilia Tamez, and I am your virtual history teacher mentor, and I'm here to make sure that you feel confident and effective as you facilitate learning in your classroom. Now, by the end of this video, you'll learn how to use supplemental material strategically, because let's be honest, sometimes we put up stuff in our classroom and we're like, woo, decorations, but we don't really know how to use it effectively for teaching vocabulary or instruction. 2, you'll learn what ingredients your lesson or activity needs in order to make those vocabulary words actually stick. And 3, I'm gonna hook you up with some super easy lesson activities for teaching vocabulary. So if you're excited to learn all this, be sure to give this video a thumbs up. Now, because I'm an educator too, and I know how busy we are, I included timestamps below if you should need them. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Welcome to my classroom. All right, y'all. So the first thing we need to do in order to teach our students history vocabulary is scaffold. Now, as a reminder, there is a difference between scaffolding and differentiating. And if you want to know a little bit more about that, I will be linking my video analyzing history sources up above in the cards and down below in the description for you to watch at the end of this video. Now, in this particular scenario, scaffolding refers to the fact that we're going to be using resources strategically to help our students make sense of the vocabulary words that they're learning in class. Now, there are several scaffolds I recommend because I totally swear by these. And the first one is the word wall. Now, I've had some teacher clients that I work with, some school districts that I work with, and I asked their team, well, do you all utilize and scaffold learning using your word walls? And they're like, oh yeah, absolutely. And then I go visit their classrooms and they have just words posted on their board or posted in the bulletin board. And they'll show me some of these posters that are sold by, big educational companies. And, they have pictures and they have words that are relevant to their topic, but the words are minuscule. The images, unless a student already comes into class knowing a bunch of history, they may not identify or relate to the image, much less if they're from a completely different country and they're learning the language as they're learning the content. Those type of scaffolding materials are just not going to click for those learners. Where are we scaffolding for our ELL learners, our ESL learners, our dyslexic learners, our visual students, which in my experience is a large chunk of the student population. So let's talk about what our vocabulary word wall should look like. So your word wall should be simplistic without stripping away the necessary understanding of how students will use that word in the history context. In my classroom, personally, what I had was vocabulary words with large, bold font, images always, because for a student that's learning the language, they can still help themselves. This is why it's a scaffolding resource. They can still help themselves make sense of the word simply by looking at the images. They need to be images that are clearly identifiable for your students' cognitive reasoning level. And of course, you also want to put your vocabulary scaffold, your word wall, in a high traffic area where your students can easily access this information and be exposed to it continuously. Now, another scaffold suggestion for teaching history vocabulary are vocabulary handouts, strategic vocabulary handouts. Now, I have a couple confessions, okay? I am not a fan of handing out just a list of words and for homework, research the definition and come up with a drawing that'll help you remember the vocabulary word. I'm also not a fan, at least for my grade level, of, make your own vocabulary word flashcards that you can use and, find the definition of the word, write it down and draw a picture on one side, the word on the other kind of deal. And I'm especially not a fan of using like that PSYOP box, right? Where students write like, what is the word? What's not the word? Draw a picture to help you remember, like that kind of deal. And here's why. First of all, I'm not shunning the research, all right? But this is just my experience. So please don't come at me. I was an ESL learner. So I can tell you from my experience also as a student, what worked for me. First of all, I find some of these activities personally boring, and so do the kids. Second of all, and this one's so dangerous, when we assign our students to, like, for homework, go look up the definitions of the word, here are the list of words you need to know, that kind of deal. Regardless of the grade level, you run the risk of, one, students using the wrong contextual definitions, because some words in history could be used other ways in language arts, right? But we need the history context because that's what they're going to use. So you run the risk of your students defining the word incorrectly and drawing a picture that, I don't know, they don't really connect with. And worse, actually remembering this definition, because y'all know if a student works on it, if a student does it, if it's student-centered, they're going to learn it. So you run that potential risk. Now, you might be playing devil's advocate and say something like,
well, we go over it in class to make sure everyone has the right definition.
The problem is when visuals are involved, and you'll hear me say this a lot on my channel, when visuals are involved, you enhance student retention. So maybe by that time, like, that information's already been learned and cemented as the right answer, even if it's wrong. So I know it may sound contradictory and go against what we typically would think would work. And of course, it takes a little bit more elbow grease on our end. But any vocabulary handout you provide, you want to ensure that you provide relevant images that pertain to that word in the context that it'll be used. And remember, these images, again, need to be simplistic and cognitively appropriate for your student's grade level. And you definitely want to emphasize the importance of this vocabulary resource handout so that students know you're going to be using this consistently during instruction, and it's not going to be like just an assignment that they get a grade on and stuff into their folder. Now, what's the problem with flashcards? The issue here is that students don't get constant and consistent exposure, visual exposure during class time to all their flashcards. They'd have to have like a whole table just to themselves. When we do not see things constantly and consistently and use repetitively, there's going to be no retention. For example, let's say that social media did not ping us notifications. After a while, you don't hear the ping. You start forgetting that there are notifications or things to look at. So people stop using the app. The notifications are what trigger us to create the habit of going on social media. Likewise, when we have our visuals posted in the classroom, not some deck that students have to flash through every time they're going to use it as a resource, but when they see it constantly and consistently, we are triggering them to use that as a scaffold, to use that as a resource. So earlier I talked about putting in that little elbow grease to include in your vocabulary handouts pre-selected images that are historically contextualized for your learners. But also, I urge you to include a simplistic, so simplified definition of the historic term. This way, your students are only going to focus on writing in the actual vocabulary word. So your student vocabulary handout might look something like this, where you give the student the definition and all they're writing in are the words. Now, I know what you might be thinking.
When students write things down, they remember it.
Yes, but in the spirit of differentiating for our learners, not all our students write at the same speed. And you could easily take 3 class periods just writing definitions. We want to make sure that we're focused on helping our students understand the meaning of the word and focus on the meaning of the word versus focusing on trying to keep up with the writing and the copying, especially for our learners that may be a little bit slow with their motor skills or have a disability. Besides, it's not the handout that's going to help your students learn history vocabulary. It's what they do with it that will. Now, a final note about your scaffolding resources that I shared earlier, the word wall, the vocabulary handout. None of these things will work unless they're used consistently, religiously during bell work, during warm-up, as a class exit ticket, during instruction, in review games, in reading and writing assignments. Now, you want to be sure that you're embedding practice into everything you do, and please don't be scared to allow your students to use their vocabulary scaffolds, their handouts, their word walls. I know that, as content tested areas, sometimes it makes us nervous to let students use resources for everything and scaffolds for everything, because we think, oh my gosh, if I let them use their scaffold for everything, or their handout, they're not going to know it for the actual day of the test. But here's the deal. By that time, your students will have seen their vocabulary, their word wall so much and so many times and used it for everything that the content will have stuck. Now, if you're with me so far, comment the word GenePass in the comments below to let me know that you've watched up to this point and that you are getting value out of this video. So let's talk about 3 lessons/activity ideas and why they work. So activity number 1 is student-led study time. Now, I know this does not sound too exciting, but I will leave the packaging up to you. You can totally call it whatever you want, but essentially you can create a game out of students quizzing each other on the vocabulary. And I know this is just a very basic recall level, but as they're seeing the images, it will help them with a comprehension. Besides, we can't expect our students to jump in their history studies from knowing nothing of the word to analysis. Not every activity in our class starts off as a DOK question 3 or as analyzing. We have to create the foundation, which is where this activity comes in. So you can make a game where students take turns quizzing each other using their vocabulary handout. The person asking the question can obviously use their scaffold with the word, with the definition. The student answering will have access to the word wall, which typically, at least in my classroom, it's just the word and the image. So they're using the images to help themselves determine, okay, which word would represent a place in the countryside, and they see pictures of a farmhouse, the mountains, a wilderness, and they'll be like, oh, the answer is rural. So your students are going to take turns with this process. Now, you can time students as they challenge each other. So maybe you can set the timer for 3 minutes and it's 3 minutes of back and forth quizzing. And you can determine a point system for every definition that is answered correctly. Now, get this, still PSYOP inspired, but not any chart activity. Why this activity works is because students are looking at the words, they're reading the words, they're seeing the images. And it's no secret that when students coach each other, sometimes their retention is better and higher than if we were to just, direct teach them. What can I say? Students got the sauce. Okay, so activity number 2 for teaching history vocabulary is just a really easy vocabulary word matchup that is class-wide. So what you can do is you can give a card to each learner as they walk in the door, and maybe as their warm-up or their entrance ticket, their job is to find the person that is the definition of their word. Now, again, why does this work? Students are peer tutoring. This is a collaborative activity. It is student-led, maybe walking around with their vocabulary scaffold and help their classmates match each other up. This activity in itself, if students are allowed to use your scaffolding handout, is also a great way to differentiate instruction for all our learners. Now, if you've ever tried this activity, let me know in the comments below what worked for you and what didn't, because I think it's important to acknowledge that what may work for one class may not work for the other. Now, if you ever want to sit down and troubleshoot some alternative solutions, some alternative activities or ideas, I do have my calendar linked below in case you'd like to reserve some one-on-one planning time with me. Now, y'all are gonna love activity number 3 because this is perfect for learners that maybe do come with a little bit of background knowledge or with an understanding, a basic understanding of these vocabulary words, and they need that little bit of challenge. Okay, so for the easiest, like zero prep method, all you need is your projector screen, and you can project one of these vocabulary words up on the screen and challenge your class to contextualize how this word connects to a historical event, person, etc. So let's pretend that the word I'm projecting on the screen is annexation. The response your learners or your teams or your groups would give you is something like, they might say the US-Mexican War, Spanish-American War, Mexican secession, Texas Revolution, anything and everything that may relate historically, contextually to this word. Now, this is a great review activity for the end of your unit. You can set a timer and make it a class challenge for points. You can do this in teams with little buzzers at their table. You can do this online with gamification apps. Well, in this particular activity, students are going a step further if they can tell you what historical event, person, etc. this is related to. You know, just the fact that your learners can make these associations tells you that they understand how to use this word and how it may present itself on a test item, in a final exam, in a benchmark, etc. Now, if this video was helpful to you, don't forget to comment Gene Pass in the comment section so that I know you made it to the end of the video and you found value all the way up until the end of the video. If you liked any of the resources that I showed in today's video, they are available at my website at www.gameplaneduSolutions.com, and I will link that below in the description for you. As always, I want your success. I'm rooting for you. Until next time, class dismissed.